landowner who planted a vineyard. He put a wall around it, dug a winepress in it, and built a watchtower. Then he rented the vineyard to some farmers and moved to another place. When the harvest time approached, he sent his servants to the tenants to collect his fruit. The tenants seized his servants. They beat one, killed another, and stoned a third. Then he sent other servants to them, more than the first time, and the tenants treated them the same way. Last of all, he sent his son to them. "They will respect my son," he said. But when the tenants saw the son, they said to each other, "This is the heir. Come, let's kill him and take his inheritance." So they took him and threw him out of the vineyard and killed him.
Quid pro quo means something for something. I do something for you, you do something for me in return. If someone were to give you a large sum of money, or a very expensive present, or a beautiful house for free, you would immediately ask why. What's the catch? Are there strings attached? We would get suspicious about the motives of the giver. There is always a price tag or some expectation. Yet God gives freely. All God asks us is that we share these blessings with others. God's gift to us are not our permanent possessions. We are stewards and caretakers and tenants of God's gifts. Every gift from God carries with it a responsibility and an obligation. All that I am is God's gift to me. All that I make of myself is my gift to God. The parable of the landowner and the tenants is a provocative story. Jesus narrates this parable as he comes closer to his end on earth. The parable is aimed at the Pharisees and the scribes, who understood his message but didn't accept it because of their pride and self-righteous attitude. The landowner in the parable does all the hard work in the beginning and sets up the vineyard for a great crop. The landowner then hands over the vineyard to a group of tenants and goes away. These tenants ought to have tended to the crop, and when it was time, given the landowner his share. It was a simple plan, and everyone would have been happy and satisfied. The landowner would get what belonged to him, and the tenants would receive the reward for their labor. But a problem arises when there is rebellion among the tenants against the landowner. The tenants were not treated unfairly or unjustly by the landowner. He did them no wrong. In fact, he trusted them with the custody of his vineyard. The problem is that the tenants were greedy. They no longer wanted to be tenants of the vineyard. They wanted to be the owners. They wanted it all, the crop and the land. The sin of the tenants is a reflection and extension of the sin of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. God has made the world, and we are blessed to be given the privilege of being tenants. The problem with us too is our claim that everything in the world is our own. We are the masters. We want God to stay out of our lives. We refuse to recognize God's ownership of the world. We claim right over life and death. We protest when governments pass unfair laws. But so many of us treat our own domestic workers in our homes unjustly and unfairly. We rightly criticize and get angry when innocent people are killed by terrorists. What about the helpless unborn babies who are silently done away with? We do not like it when others force their opinions on us. But so often, we want to have the last word and take control of the lives of others. We want to play God. We want the freedom to clone human embryos. We need stem cells. It doesn't matter if we have to harvest unborn babies. All boils down to the same sin as that of the tenants. the sin of greed, the sin of wanting more and more and more. We mistake the patience of God as indifference. Every once in a while, God humbles us. Mutual funds and shares are big-time investment business. Investments are expected to give good returns. Profitable investments are kept, and those which become a liability are sold. The landowner in the parable made an investment in his vineyard and expected good results. God's investment is in His people, and God expects good returns. We are tempted to believe that this parable is another story of another people at another time, forgetting that whatever is implied in the parable is also applicable to each one of us today. No landowner in his right mind would risk sending his own son among the rebels who had already murdered his messengers. How can we believe in a God so dumb and so naive? But that is precisely the point of the parable. We would cry for revenge on the tenants. God chose an alternative, the alternative of unconditional love. God has great expectations from you and from me. God's expectations from us are not beyond our capabilities. God does not expect us to be supermen and superwomen. God expects us to live our daily lives joyfully and meaningfully. God expects us to do the little things that we do with love. God expects us not to worry about numbers and to help one person at a time, starting with the person nearest to us. God expects us to carry our own little crosses without grumbling and cursing, without regrets and resentments. Trevor, a 15-year-old wayward youngster, took his mother's car and accidentally hit and killed a 5-year-old boy. The parents were shattered to lose their son, and the father, Max Ellerbush, was inconsolable. Trevor had to be punished. He had to be taught a lesson. The case went to court, and Trevor had little chance of leniency. He would have to go to juvenile detention. A surprised court judge heard Max, the father, ask that charges against Trevor be dropped. Instead, Max wanted to give Trevor a job and help towards his education. Max did all that and more, virtually adopting 15-year-old Trevor into his family. Max shared his home, his time, and his understanding with the troubled youth. We might wonder, how could Max do that? Many of us would never befriend a wild teenager who had just killed a 5-year-old son. Max must have been a little crazy to drop the charges in court and go out of his way to become like a father to that wayward boy. But if Max Ellerbush was a little crazy, so is God. Our God is a crazy God. Our God is a God who loves unconditionally. Let us ask ourselves, how do we respond to God's unconditional love and expectations from us? What are the kind of fruits that we produce? Do we produce fruits of joy, peace, and harmony, of love and kindness? Or do we produce fruits of anger, envy, bitterness, greed, and hatred? The sin of malice is infinitely more dangerous and destructive than the sin of human weakness. Jesus went out in search of sinners, tax collectors, and prostitutes. Their sin was the sin of human weakness, not the sin of malice like that of the tenants. Those who maliciously shut their hearts to God choose not to belong to God. Our God is a compassionate God who lives with us and who understands our weaknesses. Despite our frequent falls, our God lifts us up till one day we reach our goal to be with God forever. Every Eucharist is a gift and an opportunity to experience this compassionate and unconditional love of God for each one of us. Amen.